The world has been silent ever since Israel was founded on land that had previously belonged to the Palestinian people. It continued to be oblivious to the brutality and unlawful occupation committed against Palestinians. But this can't go on like this forever. Following Israel's invasion of Gaza, which involved attacking residential neighborhoods and destroying hospitals, other nations found it difficult to maintain their silence. However, the presidents of South Africa and Jordan were among the first nations to discuss this. Speaking at the recent Cairo Peace Summit, these two nations' leaders exposed the international community's discriminatory attitudes toward Palestine. Not only did they condemn the West, but the whole Arab and African community also hinted at doing something that would live in infamy. What nevertheless has stunned the UN is what South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Jordan's King Abdullah II said. In this video, let's find out. Jordana. During the event, King Abdullah II appeared to be upset. But in an attempt to be simultaneously diplomatic and critical of Israel, he adopted a stance that will live on for centuries. He began by wishing everyone a blessed day in the Islamic manner. All of them. He declared that the Umar Pact was a godsend for the first time, published at the walls of Jerusalem some 15 centuries ago, and predating the Geneva Conventions by more than a millennium, provided stringent guidelines for Muslim soldiers. They were ordered not to hurt women, children, or the elderly, and they were not allowed to damage churches, harm priests, or destroy trees. Recognizing the value of every civilian life is crucial, and Muslims, like all people who believe in our common humanity, have a duty to embrace and support these ideals as essential standards of engagement. But why is there not the same respect for Muslims throughout the world? The compassionate monarch of Jordan expressed his profound worries for the defenseless population in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. On every possible level, the bombing assault that is still going on in Gaza is brutal. It is blatantly against international humanitarian law and a blatant war crime to execute collective punishment on a trapped and defenseless population. But the concern of the world seems to be waning as the problem worsens. According to King Abdullah II, there has to be a clear condemnation of the attacks on civilian infrastructure and the intentional denial of basic necessities like food, water, and electricity to an entire community. As in previous recent conflicts, there must also be prompt and uncompromising accountability for these activities. Israel began a full-scale siege on the Gaza Strip 2 weeks ago today, and the world is silent for the most part. The message conveyed by the Arab world, he claimed, is clear and loud. These are the most potent and profound remarks. It seems that Israeli lives are more valuable than Palestinian lives. This statement suggests that human rights are not bound by boundaries, racial categories, or religious beliefs, and that the application of international law is optional. The globe is fine with it, provided international laws serve the West, and human rights are upheld in the West, even if the West itself devastates other areas. The King of Jordan issued a dire warning, saying that we shall all suffer much as a result of continued global passivity and inaction. He remarked that at this vital juncture, we must not allow unbridled emotions to rule us. Our priorities are very apparent right now, and they need to be addressed right now. First and foremost, we need to act quickly to end the Gaza crisis, according to King Abdullah II. Our first priority is to protect citizens. We must take a unified stand and categorically denounce the targeting of people. This denunciation is consistent with the rules of international law, which become meaningless when implemented in a selective manner, as well as our common values. Second, the international community needs to make sure that the Gaza Strip receives a steady supply of humanitarian aid, such as food, medication, and gasoline. The international community must also vehemently oppose any internal or forced displacement of Palestinians. Understanding that such acts are illegal under international law as war crimes is critical, and that this is a line that none of us should ever cross. He issued a dire warning saying that any attempt to drive Palestinians from their land will not only exacerbate the conflict but also draw in more nations. The dispute will then spiral out of control. Therefore, The world, and especially the West, should wake up and stop using double standards rather than regretting it later. According to King Abdullah II, if the world keeps going in the direction of violence, this conflict will not end after just 2 weeks. He claimed that the ultimate result, an unending circle of murder and devastation motivated by hatred and despair, with no winners and only loss, is something that all nations in the globe are all too familiar with. According to Jordan's King Abdullah II, the slaughter in the Gaza Strip is the outcome of the peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine falling short. He underlined that the continued bloodshed is the cost of the lack of significant advancement in the direction of a diplomatic resolution that would offer peace to Israelis and Palestinians alike. Additionally, King Abdullah II urged Israeli officials to understand that military measures are not the solution. He drew attention to the lack of response from the international community to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where there is a significant shortage of basic necessities such as food, water, electricity, and medical supplies. The purpose of the Cairo Peace Summit was to address the most recent events in the Israel-Palestine conflict, with participation from members of the UN, the Arab world, and other organizations. Gaza is currently experiencing a catastrophic humanitarian catastrophe due to a shortage of fuel, food, water, electricity, and medical supplies. In order to lessen the great suffering of people, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has demanded an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The President of South Africa then raised his hand. He stated, "We want to express our profound concern about the extensive human suffering in light of the ongoing and unprecedented conflict in Gaza and Israel. The attacks on Israeli citizens, the ongoing blockade of Gaza, the forced relocation of Gazans, and the ruthless and indiscriminate use of force through bombings and the destruction of infrastructure, in the opinion of South Africa, all flagrantly violate international law. These deeds also constitute a serious transgression against our common humanity." Cyril Ramaphosa made an urgent plea for the quick end of hostilities, the release of hostages, the easing of the siege on Gaza, and the creation of humanitarian corridors to guarantee the provision of basic goods to the Palestinian people, such as food and medicine. The President of South Africa further emphasized the significance of an Israeli-Palestinian conflict resolution mechanism led by the UN. The international community must encourage peace initiatives and foster an environment that is favorable to communication. He claimed to understand the difficulties encountered by the Palestinians because he is a South African. Significant pain was endured throughout South Africa's struggle for independence, just as it is now for the Palestinian people. But brave South African leaders were able to put aside their differences and seek a way to peace, which led to the downfall of the reprehensible apartheid regime. According to him, there is fear in South Africa that the Israeli government's reaction to the attacks on its residents may intensify an already existing conflict in the area, making the search for a fair and durable peace even more challenging. Additionally, there's a chance that this conflict will intensify and entice other states in the area. Achieving enduring peace requires granting the Palestinian people their just demands for statehood, human rights, and dignity. This is consistent with United Nations resolutions that uphold Israel and Palestine's statehood based on the 1967 borders. Israel, on the other hand, wishes to avoid that since it refuses to give Palestinians land. It seeks to possess all of Palestine, which was wrongfully occupied by Israel after it was originally owned by the Palestinian people. Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized that the people of Palestine and Israel can only find the freedom and self-determination they so richly deserve through a negotiated settlement supported by the international community. He went on to say that, in order to find a long-term solution to this crisis, the international community must demand an immediate ceasefire. To alleviate the continued suffering of people in Gaza, the international community must resolutely support human rights, justice, and peace. Even the Arab world, which enjoys cordial relations with Israel, can no longer remain silent. The summit's host, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, cautioned against hurting the Palestinian cause and once again rejected any talk of moving Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians to the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt is especially worried about a possible Palestinian inflow because it thinks it would significantly jeopardize the chances of a Palestinian state. Egypt may readily let individuals enter by opening the border with Gaza. That will, however, evacuate Gaza and turn it over to Israeli authorities. Israel also desires this. Its goal in bombing Gaza is to drive its citizens to the brink of exodus. There will be no more land available to Palestinians inside Israel after that. Israel's neighbors have been worried by ambiguous comments made by certain Israeli politicians and military leaders urging that Palestinians leave Gaza, as well as by Israeli orders for Palestinian residents to flee southward, toward Egypt. President el-Sisi made it clear in his opening remarks that Egypt rejects the forcible relocation of Palestinians and their transfer to Egyptian territory in the Sinai. He clarified that there is no chance of the Palestinian cause dying out in the absence of a fair resolution, and it won't ever come at Egypt's cost. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, a government with some degree of self-governance in the West Bank under occupation, has urged Israel to stop what he described as its savage onslaught in Gaza. Additionally, he issued a warning against any attempts to drive Palestinians out of the coastal region. Almost half of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians are to relocate from north to south inside a cordoned off region per Israel's orders, so driving hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into the Egyptian border. Former Israeli Defense Minister Amos Gilad has voiced worries that Israel's ambiguity on the matter is endangering important ties with Egypt. He stressed the significance of a peace agreement with Egypt for both nations' national security, as well as the larger framework of international peace. According to two high-ranking Egyptian officials, the country's relations with Israel have become increasingly problematic. They expressed their displeasure to the U.S. over Israeli remarks on displacement. Egypt fears that a large-scale migration could allow militants to infiltrate Sinai and strike Israel, putting the peace agreement in jeopardy. The vast Palestinian displacement that took place prior to and during the 1948 war, known as the Nakba, during which around 700,000 Palestinians left or were driven from what is now Israel, is another fear shared by Arab countries. Leaders denounced Israel's bombing war in Gaza during the meeting. In order to examine the growing violence between Israel and Hamas, Arab foreign ministers gathered at the Arab League headquarters in Cairo. They denounced Israel, urged for the rapid delivery of food, fuel, and humanitarian relief to the densely crowded and impoverished coastal enclave, and demanded that Israel end its embargo of Gaza. The foreign ministers of the Arab countries also arranged for Israel to reevaluate its decision to shut off Gaza's access to water and electricity. Gaza has suffered severe damage as a result of Israel's 5-day non-stop bombing in reprisal for the attack on Israeli homes near the border. Shops, factories, mosques, and residential buildings have all been the target of airstrikes. Oxygen and other medical supplies have been limited at Gaza's overcrowded Al-Shifa hospital. The UN has even criticized Israel for its treatment of Palestinians. The top UN human rights officer has voiced grave alarm over the rising violence in the occupied West Bank and warned that things might quickly get out of hand. The use of deadly force by Israel during a raid on the Jenin refugee camp, which claimed the lives of at least 7 Palestinians, including children, was particularly chastised by him. To capture 2 individuals, Israeli forces conducted a raid in the Jenin refugee camp, but that was a falsehood. They used helicopter gunships in the occupied West Bank, an extraordinary step unseen in the previous 20 years. These gunships targeted the camp, killing 91 people and injuring 91 others. The UN's Volker Turk expressed his worries on Friday, highlighting the situation's quick decline brought on by the escalating deployment of heavy weaponry. He urged Israel to put an end to the violence, saying that Israel's increased use of cutting-edge military hardware and loud political rhetoric are fueling the possibility that this week's violence in the occupied West Bank may spiral out of control. Turk stressed that the operation marked a notable increase in the usage of military hardware that is usually connected to armed conflict as opposed to law enforcement. Turk emphasized that the current scenario is putting both Israelis and Palestinians in danger and urged Israel to abide by international law. He urged Israel to immediately bring its acts and policies in the West Bank into compliance with international human rights norms, including the defense and upholding of the right to life. Recent months have seen an increase in Israel's actions in the occupied region, particularly under its most right-wing administration to date. It is important to remember that over 700,000 Israelis live in illegal settlements in the East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank, which Israel seized during the 1967 war. International law does not recognize these colonies as Israeli territory. In all of that, the United States is providing Israel with unwavering backing. Thus, the United States will support Israel regardless of whether it destroys all of Gaza, bombs it, or sets it on fire. That will be noted on the list of historical wrongdoers. For present, the U.S. is adamantly opposing calls for a ceasefire, as Israel continues to bomb Gaza, murdering hundreds of Palestinians, most of them women and children. This has sparked concerns about why the United States is backing the Israeli offensive. President of the United States Joe Biden has warned against an escalation of the violence, while simultaneously pledging unwavering support for Israel. Experts have pointed out that there can be a clash between these two objectives. Not only are they at odds with one another, but it seems like the administration prioritizes defending Israel over making sure there is no catastrophic escalation, as noted by Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute, a think tank that advocates diplomacy. U.S. officials have been asking Israel hard questions over its military campaign in Gaza, particularly queries concerning the war's ultimate objectives. But the U.S.'s own objective in this regard is still very vague. The military presence in the area has increased despite the White House's constant claims that it intends to send soldiers there. According to recent reports, the Pentagon may have sent advisors to help Israel prepare for a possible ground assault of Gaza. Biden has stated that he wants to stop the conflict from getting worse, but there are signs that it might. In recent days, there have been targeted attacks against U.S. forces in the region by groups associated with Iran, in addition to the continuous hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah. Although these conflicts haven't gotten out of hand yet, experts have cautioned that they might intensify, either on purpose or as a result of poor judgment. Beyond giving the Israeli military effort political and logistical backing, it is unclear what the U.S. overall strategy is. As Trita Parsi noted, the Biden administration doesn't seem to have a clear goal in mind. It is very tough to identify a clear plan that would yield the necessary outcomes when it comes to this strategic image. Adam Shapiro is the Director of Advocacy for Israel-Palestine at Democracy for the Arab World Now, a human rights organization with headquarters in the United States. He feels that while the Biden administration completely supports Israel's war in Gaza, it lacks a defined goal. Even though Biden has called for the group to be eradicated, military operations to do so are unlikely to be successful, which raises questions about the long-term effects on U.S. interests. Moreover, it is still unclear what will happen to Gaza in the event of an Israeli ground attack. In the besieged Palestinian region, as was the case from 1967 to 2005, when thousands of Israeli ground forces were stationed there, Biden has voiced resistance to the restoration of a permanent Israeli presence. The uncertainty surrounding Israel's approach in Gaza and its implications for U.S. policy have been brought to light by Brian Finucane, senior advisor for the U.S. program at the crisis organization think tank. He pointed out that even in the unlikely event that Israel succeeds in overthrowing Hamas, the current ruling party in Gaza, it has not yet stated what would take its place. Finucane has also highlighted a disconnect between Washington's attempts to avert a bigger conflict and its support for Israel. It may entail U.S. soldiers, requiring a clear U.S. endgame if the Biden administration is unable to prevent Iran and its allies from escalating the fight. The United States doesn't seem to have learned from its past. Politicians on both sides of the aisle have recommended prudence in any potential future military operations in the wake of the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, reflecting a general public fatigue with foreign conflicts in the United States. However, as Brian Finnegan noted, the horrors carried out during Hamas's October 7th attack have altered the discourse in Washington. Professor Shibli Telhami of the University of Maryland, who specializes in peace and development, stated that neither Iran nor the United States appear ready for a more protracted military conflict. He did, however, issue a warning that they might become involved if there was a miscalculation or a major escalation in the Gaza battle. He underlined that the United States shouldn't just follow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's military activities without question, since doing so could result in U.S. engagement in the conflict on a direct basis. Talhami told Al Jazeera earlier this month, "You cannot leave that decision in the hands of an extremist Israeli government whose ministers hold views that are not aligned with American interests and values." Amnesty International claims that the Biden administration is currently allowing Israel to carry out a heavy bombing campaign that is killing entire families in Gaza. Talks of a truce have been dismissed by U.S. authorities, claiming that such negotiations would ultimately help Hamas, but it soon becomes apparent that the U.S. is losing friends in the Arab world and that this will be a costly loss for the U.S. How do you feel? Should South Africa and Jordan be the poster children for the hypocrisy of the world? Do you believe that what is taking on in Gaza is required by international law? Tell us what you think. Should the world wake up and prosecute those who disobey the law? Would you like to see more videos similar to this one? Click the bell icon next to it and subscribe to our channel if the answer is yes. We have made the decision to present videos on a topic that is rarely discussed: Black history, culture, and civilization, as well as examples of how amazing Black people have always been. I appreciate you viewing, and be sure to tune in for the next one.